Welcome back to the workshop. This is part 3 of the final part of the Gin-Kart series. Part 1 was making the marquee letters and part 2 was making the wheels. In this final part I'm going to be making the kart and assembling everything together and then taking it off to my niece's wedding. And I'll put a few video clips at the end of the kart in situ with Jim and the party that followed. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoy it. To start off with, I'm going to take some stock timber from my local woodyard. I'm going to be making a box frame. This is going to form the top part of the kart. Once each piece is cut to length, I then mark up some measurements along one side. This is going to let me know where I'm going to use my pair of compasses to make some arcs to form like a scallop top on this. I then run along with a square, making a long and a short mark. The long mark is going to be where the compass point is going to sit, and the short mark should be where it crosses this next line here. Once I've got this all marked up, grab my great big set of compasses, and then as you can see from the long to the short, making an arc. And this pattern runs all the way around the edge. Then it's onto the bandsaw. Using my usual blade here, my 10 tooth 3/16 blade, and I'm just going to use the bandsaw to cut around these pre-marked scallops, cut around these pre-marked shapes. Basically I start cutting in one direction and cut to the apex of the compass mark and then back out and then move on to the next one. Now once I've gone all the way in one direction, I then flip the board round and come at it in the other direction, obviously removing the piece of material as you go. It's quite quick and easy to do, and the effects, the finished effect is really nice. There's a fair few of these to do, so it took a bit of time working my way around. Once those are all cut, rather than waiting for the frame to be assembled, I just grabbed my orbital sander and made a good progress on sanding everything down. I then grab a blade and cut a small notch into the side of the wood. This means when I'm making the rebate for the frame, I'm not going to get a tear out on the end. Working the way down to about halfway through the thickness of the wood. Once that's done, I can then take a bit of sandpaper and just literally just knock off any rough edges, and then we're left with a nice rebate. So two of the sides have got rebates on them, the short edges don't. To make this nice and sturdy, to allow the legs to bolt into it, to give it some real strength, I decided this is the best time to glue up now. Once everything's glued, get some clamps on there, get everything tight together. The final kart's going to be painted, so once I'm checked every angle is nice and square, I'm then going to put in a few screws, and to stop the wood splitting I pre-drill these with a countersunk drill bit. Once everything's dried and gone off, then grab the orbital sander again, and where the two corners meet, I knock off the overlap and sand it down so that it's nice and smooth and everything looks like one piece. So now onto the framework. This is some just under, I think it's just under 2-inch square stock again, and to start off with I'm making the long leg which sits on the floor, and I put a taper on this using the bandsaw, just working outside the line here. I can then use a hand plane and I can refine the angle and also just smooth it up nicely, ready for painting later. So here I've got the bandsaw set to give me pretty much half the material, and I'm just literally taking a notch out of each side, and these notches, these are going to be the long edges, the long rails of the kart. glued up, screwed together, painted later. So same process, using a drill bit with a countersink on so I don't get a split. Just check again for square, and once I've checked again for square, just to make sure nothing's moved, I can then put a second screw in, and that glue is going to go off and it's going to give me a joint nice and strong. Once I've done one end again, the other end here you can see the tapered leg, and same process again, drill and screw. So with the two sides with the long legs finished and glued up, I can then clamp these in to the top frame, which is of course sitting upside down, and these are then going to then be glued and screwed in place. Yep, this job there's a lot of screws that's going to be put in, lots of gluing, lots of screwing. Then space these verticals nicely. I've got a half width piece here. Once that's been screwed in place and fixed properly, I can then turn my attention to the lower shelf, we'll call it. Now the lower shelf is just going to be some slats running across. And by the magic of video editing, speed this up, using just a level to make sure they're all level on one side, and then yep, you've guessed it, plenty of screws holding these slats in place. Later these are just going to get a couple of coats of polyurethane varnish, flip the cart round, same process on the other side. Next part of the project of the gin cart is to make the handles. I've mounted some square stock in my lathe. I give it a quick spin to make sure it's not going to catch on the rest. I then use the roughing out tool to turn half of it down to roughly the right diameter. Half of this is going to remain square for bolting onto the gin cart. Once I'm nearly at the right diameter, I then swap to a smaller gouge and carefully make the transition between square and round, checking the diameter as I go just to make sure I'm not making it too thin. I'm doing this really carefully because I don't want to cause any chips or tear outs as I'm turning this round. I then use a parting tool to turn the diameter of the handle at both ends and check this with a pair of calipers just to make sure I'm not going to make it too narrow. After this I can then swap back to the spindle gouge again, and I'm just turning a recess here to give it a bit of a decorative finish on the handle. And with the parting tool I turn the handle down to the correct diameter. I use the spindle gouge to rough out as much as I need to, finishing off with the tip of the handle to give it a nice radius on the end. With the skew chisel I try and remove as many marks as I can, but I'm not a perfect wood turner, so of course once I've finished with the skew chisel it's onto some sandpaper to make everything nice and smooth. Catch my fingers there working from the wrong side. Turning my attention to the cart end of the handle, I want to put a radius similar to the radius at the other end of the square section. So it's just working it down, trying not to get tear out, trying not to get a chip out on anything. You will notice that I've put 3 little grooves in the handle. For some reason I didn't record this. So take it off the lathe and then over to the bandsaw. I'm going to run the bandsaw almost the whole way. This is going to be a nice big flat area to put a couple of coach bolts in to bolt these onto the cart itself. Literally turning 90 degrees now and just remove that last bit of material there. The thing I wanted to do was put the wheels on. So this is a bit of stock tubing just with a couple of brackets from the hardware store. The wheels, if you're interested in the wheels, I'll put a link in the video at the top. Now that the cart's upright and on the floor and at the right level, it's easier to work on the top half. So here's the handles going on, and literally then it's just bolt them on from the other side. I glued up a top, just the same stock materials used before. Off camera, I've made this top shelf bit. This is actually where the gins themselves are going to stand in their glass jars. Pretty much completed the construction side, so now it's on to the finishing. First thing I've got to do is mix up some 2-part epoxy filler, and any of the screw heads that are going to be visible, apart from the screw heads on the slats, because of course they're going to be varnished, I'm going to put in a bit of filler, let that go off. And there's a lot of screw heads here because obviously I've been putting a lot of screws in. Work my way around, get every single screw head nice and filled, let that go off, and then onto some hand sanding. And this stuff really sands out really fast, so it doesn't take long to get this prep finished. And then finally painting. 2 coats of the undercoat, just like I put on the wheels if you watch the wheel video, and then a top coat, satin finish. The main top and the shelf top get 2 coats of polyurethane varnish. To attach the wheels, I put in a split pin. I intend to put some washers in here, but didn't have any in time for filming the video. Once I've split out the end of the pin and used the pair of pliers as a hammer, I've got a cap that goes on to stop people catching their legs on the sharp metal. The main tops get held on with some brackets that have got slots that will allow for some expansion and contraction of the top. And then the gin cart sign, a link in the corner if you haven't watched the gin cart sign, gets attached on 2 back standoffs to hold it above the top shelf. And then off to the wedding. So here's the gin cart when we first assembled it on site. More and more things got placed on there, and people then served gin off it and really enjoyed it, and very happy the way it turned out. And a couple of final photos. Thanks for watching.